Okay, well, welcome back. I know it has been a while since I posted anything. There's just been a lot going on in my life in the last 6 months or so. So, just a little brief update for those of you that are kind of new. Um, I have been a college professor for the past 9 years, and an opportunity came up in my city to hopefully create something that I think could be really meaningful, but the funding has not been approved for that yet. So I've left my position at the university in hopes of that coming together. And so, in the time between hopefully that becoming a reality and now, I wanted to offer some more educational videos, some things that might be helpful to the community. Obviously, teaching is super important to me and helping people on their journeys. And if it weren't for people that were doing that for me whenever I was a younger photographer, I don't know where I'd be right now. So I thought I would continue to maybe make some videos this summer while I'm waiting to hear back about this next job opportunity. And hopefully that'll be helpful for you. Maybe I might do a few more book videos. We'll see. But I had an idea to maybe break down a photograph and talk about composition, because that is something that there's a lot of information out there on composition and the ways to think about how you compose an image. And there's definitely, a lot of different ways to go about doing this, whether it's very complex or very simplified. And those all have kind of implications for the viewer. So for me, I kind of work in a few different ways. Sometimes I like really dense frames, and sometimes I like extremely simple frames. So I thought what we would do is maybe look at a recent picture that I made, just hanging out with my family out at the local amphitheater while there was a concert going on, and maybe break down what my thought process was in the picture, how the composition hopefully works, and also maybe something that I would do differently or wish that was present in the composition. Okay, so let's take a look at it. And we'll just kind of work through this. This is the first time I've ever done kind of a composition breakdown. So what we have here is obviously a color picture that was shot with a 35 millimeter lens. So it's going to be slightly wide, but also not super wide to distort the actual image. There are several subjects in here. There's these two little girls. There's this older woman here walking up the hill. And then there's a couple up on the top right. And so whenever I was making this picture, there was a series of images before and after. To find and discover a composition, you have to be out there making a lot of other pictures. And I tend to start with pieces of the composition as I'm making pictures. And then as I see that, oh, that's one component, then I tend to take a few more steps back and look at the rest of the scene a little more clearly. So again, there's multiple methodologies and thoughts behind composing a picture. Some people really want to move towards the most simplistic, simplified frame possible. And the benefit of that is that it communicates really clearly, and it's easy to approach. And I think depending on where your skill level is, that might be off-putting. But I think, at the end of the day, we do want people to see and consume our images. And I find that the more complex the picture, the smaller that audience becomes. Because I would imagine that, when someone sees this picture, if they don't have a lot of tools in their toolkit to break apart a picture, then it may not be that interesting to them, or they might just pass right by it and look for the next picture of someone smiling with the background out of focus. Everything has its place. Recently, I've been trying to push myself to make more complex, dense compositional images. So let's break this down in why I think it works and where it doesn't work and where it needs help. On the front end, let's talk about just basic lines and shapes and colors that are in here. I've been shooting black and white for a while, and I'm moving back to shooting color, and that's been a fun exercise in seeing color, especially in the summertime when the sun has a certain warmth to it at the end of the day. So the first thing, let's look at this picture, and we have some shapes. One dominant, we have some dominant shapes in here, right? Like check out this big green wall. Let's see if I can make this work. There we go. So we have this really pronounced color. This, I don't know what kind of color of green that is. And it makes this kind of this Z shape. And that's a really dominant part of the image. It takes up a lot of landscape in the photo. So that color is very present to us. Not only that, we're blending some rectangle shapes, and what you're going to see is several rectangles and several triangles. So the rectangles and squares should be fairly obvious around the frame, but maybe what we don't immediately see is, some of these triangle shapes, like the big swatch of grass down at the bottom. That creates kind of like a triangle, and I think what helps the frame a lot in a lot of these very geometric forms, or very like square and rectangle, straight on, straight verticals, straight horizontals, 90 degrees from each other, is having a strong diagonal. And so this is the way that I see the world a lot of times, is I'm drawn to triangles and I'm drawn to a lot of diagonals. If you go to my website and just thumb through all the pictures there, you're going to see a ton of diagonals. Sometimes in the past, I've overlaid some of them to see the like actual degree of line. And there is like an actual degree that I tend to be drawn to, which sounds crazy, but it's just the way that that's what my brain sees. I almost can't help it. And so this strong diagonal breaks up all of these geometric forms in some way. And also diagonals add a bit more movement for our eyes, and not literally. When people used to say that when I was starting out in photo classes, I'm like, my eye isn't moving anywhere. What it really means is it makes your eye uncomfortable enough to look around the frame a bit more. When we have more geometric, strong horizontals and strong verticals, that tends to make people feel more at peace, but it also tends to quiet down the frame, and we're less drawn to look around. There's less conflict. And diagonals give us a slight visual conflict to kind of look around the frame a bit more. And we want to invite people to look around the frame, especially something like this. Because if you don't look around the frame, you might just pass by this picture, which maybe you should. Maybe it's not a good picture. One of my biggest gripes with this picture is I really, really, really wish that I could see more faces. Almost all the faces are obscured, and that bothers me. But on the other hand, if we have very pronounced dominant faces, that's going to take visual priority over some of the shapes and forms. So if we see a human face, we're going to be drawn to the human face more than the forms in the picture. Now, of course, you'll look at all those things, but just as a priority list. So maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. It bothers me that I can't clearly see the faces in this picture. Okay, so let's talk about more of the shapes that are involved. Of course, I like this big green wall. That's why I was like making pictures in and around the wall. I love the diagonal line. This is actually my daughter in the little black shirt, and she was running up and down this hill with this as the backdrop, and that's kind of where it all started. But with that big green wall, we also have a nice little splash of orange. So if we look at this webbing material here, kind of the construction zone material, that orange complements that green really well. So those are nice color combinations to have. And then, of course, we always have our ever-present like blue sky splash. So one gripe I have is that the color difference of the blue sky and this green wall is not dramatic. They kind of a little bit muddy together in my eye. So, maybe, I don't know, if we had some clumpy white clouds there instead, that might add much more texture and layer and another, smaller picture to look at. So that kind of leads me to the next way that I think about pictures. So of course I'm thinking about the shapes that are involved and how I can keep visual interest through the splotches of color. One thing that I would encourage you to do is when you look at a picture, try to ignore all the subject matter. And this sounds crazy, but like try to blur your eyes to where all you see is line and color. That's it. Or shape and form if you're talking about a black and white picture. You don't think about that it's not a person anymore, it's just a shape. It's not a power line. It's not a lamp. It's just a shape. And that can help you start to think about where the shapes go in the frame and how that will work. So part of this frame that I was drawn to when I made it is that I like that there's a lot of small pictures in the big picture. And I think there's so many incredible practitioners of this that are capable of making a single frame. But if you look, it's almost like they've captured, 4 or 5 pictures in the one frame. So this was my attempt at that. I don't know if it's super successful or not. So let's just look at one picture within a picture. So if we look kind of in the top right corner up here, there's almost like this little box that's created where we have, this dark splotch here, the shadow, which we can't see any detail in, which good or bad, you can't see any detail there. We have this guy holding a cup. We have a little bit of the American flag, which I wish was a bit more prominent in the frame. We have the power lines. And if we look, most things kind of have their own little box. So this little box where the power line is, it exists within that box. This guy exists within this box. We have this splotch of orange here. So if we start looking for these smaller boxes within, these smaller pictures within, we can move over to like the top left-hand corner. And then we have a very simple picture within a picture. Where we have, this lamp sits perfectly in this box here, where it has a lot of contrast. And so sometimes I'm also looking for each little detail landing in a place to where there's enough contrast that you can see the shape really well. It doesn't kind of blend together with the background. So this lamp becomes very dominant because it contrasts that green really well. Whereas like down here, the shape of whatever this little alcove is, the top of a door with the restroom sign, because it's so dark and there's not, if the sunlight were hitting that directly, there would be a bit more contrast, but it just kind of blends in and it becomes not so noticeable. So it doesn't really work in that part of that mini picture. Now, if we look below that area, all of this is in shadow, and I've lifted it a little bit, and this may be something where this isn't the final version of this picture, because I just need to look at it to see how much to pull out of that. It was very, very dark, so I've lifted it a little bit to see a little bit of detail. Honestly, I would want to print it to see how it registers on paper. But some people, their inclination would be to lift this all the way up where you can see all the detail in the shadow. And you have to remember that, splotches of shadow can sometimes be the darker blobs in the frame that you need to balance the lighter things in the frame as well. So I'm kind of back and forth on whether that should come up maybe a little bit in the shadows. I don't know, probably not. There's another little small picture in here, and that's of the little girls. And this is kind of where my picture started. I was much closer in distance. Again, I'm shooting with a 35mm lens. So, I have to zoom with my feet. So if we zoom in on this, let's see if I can make this work without completely destroying our video setup. I was seeing this shape of these girls walking, the diagonal, the shadow on the wall, and trying to incorporate, the kids with the shadow. And while I was doing this, there were multiple kids that were coming in and out playing. We could even see if we move to composition over here, that there's possibly like a triangle from the shadow to the staircase that you can barely see. So there's a couple of different smaller compositions right there. But one thing I noticed really quickly is, I'm going to zoom in, this image is probably going to fall apart because it's only like 16 megapixels, it's pretty small. This is too simple for me. Like visually, it's just too simple. And right now I'm not really interested in overly simplified compositions and pictures. So making this a part of a larger frame, then to me becomes much more interesting. Of it being just a small piece of everything else. So as we're kind of like wrapping up, I don't really know how long this has gone. Again, first try, let me know if this is helpful. If this is not helpful, I won't do any more compositional breakdowns. I was texting with a friend of mine named Will, who's a photographer in Nashville, like really, really great photographer. We've been friends for a long, long time. We met on Flickr. That's how long we've been friends. And Will was texting me about this image because I had posted it on Instagram, and I realized like the picture's really missing something for me, and I think if it had even one little thing, it would make all the difference to me. And it was immediately in my imagination. It was dandelions. So I just grabbed a copywritten illustration off of off the internet. This is not my illustration down here at the bottom corner. But for me, if there would have been two yellow dandelions in the bottom left-hand corner, I think that really would have made the picture sing. Because another thing that's in this picture, I don't know if you saw this, but there's this repeating pairing. There's repeating pairings around the picture. So we have, of course, the two little girls. We have this lady's two legs that are very dominant because of the contrast from the background. We have these two poles up here in the top right. I feel like there's another couple of pairs. Oh, on this wall right here, there's these two like spots where the paint is peeled off, these little pairs. So there's these kind of like echoed pairs around the frame. And I think if there was like a pair of dandelions down here in the bottom left-hand corner somewhere, not only would that yellow kind of be a nice counterpoint for the blue on the complete opposite end of the frame with the sky, but it would also fill this space down here and give us something, just one thing for our eye to hit. Because I think one of the huge weaknesses of this picture, and why it's like this is not a portfolio image, is that if I take that you know picture of those dandelions away, you'll notice there's nothing really down here in the bottom left-hand corner. And in a lot of the other parts of the frame, there's something that lives there, but not in the bottom left-hand corner. There's a little bit of this grass down here, but it just kind of blends in. So I would say, compositionally, to make this much, much stronger, if there was something, whether it was like an old white styrofoam cup or dandelions or something that had some contrast from that green in the bottom left-hand corner, I think the picture would be much, much stronger. So I think the obvious next question is, well, why don't you just do generative fill dandelions on there? Well, you know, I believe in reality, and I try to photograph what was in front of me. And if you're a person that photographs what's in front of you, then your imagination is always more capable than what your camera is. And, you know, I have thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures that if there were just one little element that happened to be there that wasn't there in reality, it would make the picture a lot better. But it wasn't there. And I could go on a whole ethical conversation about reality versus construction and how culturally we're sprinting towards non-reality and of simulation. And I like watching movies and I like simulated things, but when we jettison reality because it's not perfect, we're kind of missing the point. And so this picture is very much imperfect. It's not great. It'll never win an award, but it is what it was. And when I look at it, it reminds me of being there. And I hope that whenever you see a picture like this, you can kind of smell the humid Tennessee summer air a little bit, that it echoes a latent memory. And I think that's what real pictures can do. Okay, I'll get off my little soapbox. So I hope this was helpful. If you have questions, this is just the way that I go about thinking about putting a picture together. If you want to see more of these types of things, let me know, and I'll go through and look at maybe some of my recent work or older work, and show you some pictures and break them down. And hopefully that can be helpful. And if you have any questions, of course, please post them. I'll do my best to answer them. And hope this was helpful, and maybe look forward to more videos soon. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.